Beneath the breath of the Andes, the world feels suspended between clouds and stars. A river glimmers like a silver thread, winding through the sleeping valleys of Peru. Somewhere above, the ancient stones of Machu Picchu still dream, untouched by time, bathed in moonlight. Tonight, you drift back through those clouds of memory, into a world built on terraces that touch the sky, a world where the people of the sun learned to carve their home into the bones of the mountains, where every step was prayer, every crop a promise, every sunrise a covenant with Inti, the god of light. The wind carries the scent of wet stone, maize, and fire. You can almost hear the slow rhythm of a distant drum. It echoes softly across the peaks, calling the children of the Andes to remember their empire, their glory, their fall. Before you sleep, let your breath slow. Inhale the mountain air. Exhale the centuries. In this stillness, the past opens like a gate, and beyond it lies the Inca world, bright as gold, yet fragile as the mist that crowns the sacred mountains at dawn. So close your eyes and follow the river upward, where the stars meet the stone. For the story of the Inca Empire begins not with conquest, but with a whisper that says, "The sun once ruled the earth from the heights of the Andes." The first light of dawn touches the Andes like a whispered blessing. High above the world, the peaks shimmer in shades of rose and gold, their jagged crowns breaking through a sea of drifting clouds. The air is thin, almost sacred, and the silence carries the weight of centuries. This is where the story of the Inca begins. Not in war, not in conquest, but in the patient rhythm of stone, water, and sun. In the beginning, there was only the mountain and the mist. The ancestors of the Inca, wandering tribes of the high plains, lived as shepherds and farmers, following the paths of llamas and the rivers that fed their terraces. They learned to read the stars as maps and the wind as a message. Each dawn, they raised their faces to the east, where the light of Inti, the sun, spilled gently across the ridges. They called themselves children of the sun, and from that devotion, their destiny began to take shape. The mountains were harsh, but the people were patient. They carved steps into stone cliffs, turning the impossible into a living ladder of green terraces. Every patch of soil was precious, nurtured by rainwater, guarded by stone walls, warmed by the gentle fire of faith. They planted maize, quinoa, and potatoes, and sang to the earth as they worked. In their songs, the earth was a mother, Pachamama, and the mountain was a father, strong and silent. To live here, one had to learn balance between wind and stone, hunger and harvest, silence and prayer. When the first villages formed around sacred springs, the people began to speak of legends. They said that once, a golden man and a silver woman had risen from the waters of Lake Titicaca. Their names were Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, children of Inti, sent to bring order to the world. Wherever Manco's golden staff sank into the ground, that place would become the heart of a new empire. They wandered for days, through valleys and ridges, until the staff finally pierced the earth in a small, fertile basin. A place that would become Cusco, the navel of the world. At dawn, they built a temple to the sun. The first rays of morning touched its golden walls, and the people felt the warmth as a promise. They believed the sun had chosen them, not to rule, but to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. Each year, they held ceremonies at the solstice, lighting sacred fires to renew the bond between light and life. The Inca way was not only about worship, it was a philosophy, a discipline of balance, gratitude, and duty. To live in alignment with the cosmos was the highest virtue. As centuries passed, the scattered clans of the Andes grew into small kingdoms. They traded salt for maize, copper for wool, obsidian for gold. Their paths became trails, their trails became roads. And on those roads walked the messengers of faith, carrying tales of the children of the sun who built cities among the clouds. One could travel for days without seeing another village, yet the same rhythm of life pulsed through them all. The rhythm of terraces and temples, prayers and patience. Night returns quickly in the mountains. As the last light fades behind the peaks, fires begin to flicker in the valleys. Smoke rises like thin threads of dream toward the stars. The people of the Andes sit together, their faces glowing in the firelight. They speak of spirits in the rocks, of condors who carry souls to the heavens, and of a time when the sun will descend once more, to walk among them. Somewhere above, the moon drifts quietly over the snowcaps. A flute hums, soft and slow. The earth breathes. The rivers murmur, and in the cradle of stone and sky, a civilization begins to stir, not from ambition, but from harmony. The Inca world is waking, and with it, the dream of a golden empire that will rise higher than the clouds. At the heart of the Andes, surrounded by mountains shaped like sleeping giants, a valley waited. The air there was warmer, the soil dark and rich. Streams ran down from glaciers, weaving through fields of tall grass. And in that quiet cradle, Manco Capac planted his golden staff into the earth. It sank deep, as if the mountain itself accepted his offering. The people who followed him knelt, for they knew what it meant. This is the place, the heart of the sun. They began to build, not with haste, but with reverence. The first walls rose from stone fitted so precisely that no blade could slip between them. They called this place Cusco, meaning the navel of the world. Here, they believed, the sky and the earth were joined. And from this sacred center, life would radiate outward like rays of sunlight. At dawn, the valley glowed golden. Fields of maize shimmered as if brushed by fire. The air smelled of wet soil and smoke. Women ground corn into flour. Children carried baskets of quinoa. Llamas grazed on the hillsides, their soft cries echoing through the mist. And in the center of it all, the temple began to rise. A monument to Inti, the god who had sent his children to bring order to the world. The temple's name was Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun. Its walls were lined with sheets of pure gold, reflecting dawn so brightly that travelers said it blinded their eyes. Within, priests tended the sacred flame that was never allowed to die. They studied the movement of the stars, marked the solstices, and kept the calendar of life and harvest. For the Incas, time was not a line but a circle, the eternal rhythm of planting, growth, and renewal. Every morning, when the first light touched the temple's walls, the high priest would raise his hands to the east. He whispered prayers in the Quechua tongue, not of conquest, but of gratitude. For the Inca believed that power came not from domination, but from duty. The Sapa Inca, the emperor, was both ruler and servant, a bridge between the heavens and the earth. The people worked together in perfect rhythm. Their system was called Aini, the sacred reciprocity. If one man built a terrace, his neighbors helped. If one family harvested, others came to assist. In return, all shared the grain, the wool, the water. No one stood alone in the empire of the sun. It was a network of faith and cooperation, woven tighter than the finest cloth of alpaca wool. Cusco grew, slowly, symmetrically, purposefully. Roads extended from it like the spokes of a sunburst, reaching across valleys and rivers. 4 great regions formed around it, each connected by stone highways that could carry news from one end of the empire to the other. At night, fires along these roads glimmered like stars fallen to the earth. And through the silence of the Andes, messengers ran, swift and tireless, carrying the words of the Inca, ensuring that every voice, from farmer to priest, was part of one great conversation between man and mountain. Yet, even amid order, mystery endured. Some nights, villagers swore they saw lights dancing above the mountains. Spirits of ancestors, they said, watching over the living. And when thunder rolled across the peaks, they bowed their heads. For it was Ilapa, the god of storms, reminding them that even stone must yield to the sky. As the generations passed, Cusco became more than a city. It became a symbol, the heartbeat of an empire bound not by iron, but by belief. From its plazas came the laws of the sun. From its terraces came the food that fed millions. From its silence came a unity so profound that it seemed eternal. But nothing on earth endures forever. The rivers that nurture also carve away the stone, and even the brightest gold dulls beneath time's breath. For now, though, as torches flicker and drums echo against the mountains, Cusco glows like a living sun. Its temples hum with prayers, its people sleep under the gaze of sacred stars, and high in the Coricancha, the eternal flame burns, soft, steady, alive. For this is not yet an empire of conquest. It is an empire of faith. And faith, like light, always begins quietly, before it blinds the world. The golden age of the Inca dawned beneath a blinding sky. From the terraces of Cusco, the valleys shimmered with life, rivers flashing like veins of light, fields rippling in green waves. At the center stood the Sapa Inca, radiant in robes woven with gold and feathers, his brow encircled by the Mascapaicha, the scarlet fringe of kings. He was not merely a man, but the living son of Inti, the sun itself walking upon the earth. His name was Pachacuti, the world transformer. When he rose to power, the Inca realm was a circle of small kingdoms, fragile as dust in the wind. But under his vision, the mountains awakened. He saw not just stone and soil, but destiny. He imagined an empire that could stretch across the spine of South America, from the deserts of the Pacific to the edge of the Amazon's green sea. An empire where the rhythm of one city would echo across 1,000 valleys. Pachacuti began with order, not war. He rebuilt Cusco as a cosmic center, a city designed to mirror the heavens. its streets aligned with the constellations, its temples formed the pattern of a great puma, its heart pulsing where the coricancha gleamed like dawn. He said that every stone had a spirit, and every road was a prayer. To build was to honor the gods, and so he built endlessly. The empire that followed was called Tawantinsuyu, the four regions united. It was a network of roads, mountains, and people bound by faith and duty. Stone highways stretched for over 25,000 miles, carved through cliffs, bridged across rivers, and paved with the hands of thousands. Along these roads ran the Shaski, the swift messengers of the sun, each carrying a knotted cord called a quipu, a silent language of numbers and memory. Through the quipus, they recorded harvests, births, taxes, and offerings, threads of data woven into living memory. There was no written alphabet, yet nothing was forgotten. In the Inca world, numbers sang where words could not. Each knot told a story, each color carried a lore. The empire flourished not by conquest alone, but by invitation. Villages that joined the Inca order received protection, food, and the blessings of Inti. Their gods were welcomed, their customs respected. For the Inca did not erase, they absorbed. And in that union, they found strength. The empire became a tapestry, woven of many threads, yet shining with one light. From the high citadels of Sacsayhuaman to the terraces of Ollantaytambo, stone met sky in perfect geometry. Each block was shaped by hand, without iron or wheel, fitted so precisely that earthquakes could not break them. They believed that harmony gave strength, that when stones loved each other, even the earth could not tear them apart. At dusk, the city sang. Drums echoed from the temples, flutes drifted through the corridors of stone. Priests raised offerings of corn beer, coca leaves, and llama fat to the heavens, thanking Inti for another day of balance. In the distance, the mountains glowed with the last fire of sunset. To the Incas, these peaks were not mountains but apus, living spirits, guardians of the valleys, watching over the people below. Pachacuti's empire grew vast, from the coast of modern-day Ecuador to the deserts of Chile. His rule reached over 10 million souls, each connected by the roads of stone, each bound by the same sun and the same silence. There were no prisons, few wars. Order was maintained through respect, ritual, and the rhythm of labor. Each man owed work to the state, the mita. But in return, no one starved, and no one stood alone. In the great festival of Inti Raymi, tens of thousands gathered in Cusco. They wore robes dyed in crimson and gold, and sang hymns that shimmered through the thin air like flame. At the center, the Sapa Inca stood before the sun. He raised a golden goblet to the sky, and when the first light touched it, the people knelt, whispering, "Inti, shine forever upon your children." For a time, it seemed that nothing could end them. The mountains bowed, the rivers obeyed, the stars seemed to listen. The Inca had found the secret of peace through discipline, and discipline through faith. But the sun, like all things, moves in cycles, and even as the light blazed brightest, the shadows began to gather at the edge of the world. Across the empire, The roads of the Inca shone like veins of sunlight carved into the earth. They wound through deserts, climbed ice-capped ridges, and vanished into clouds. To travel them was to trace the heartbeat of the sun itself. Each stone, each turn, each echo of a running footstep carried the rhythm of a civilization that had mastered not only the mountains, but movement itself. The Inca called this living network the Capac Ñan, the Royal Road. It stretched for more than 25,000 miles, a feat so vast that even centuries later, explorers could scarcely believe it was made without iron, wheel, or beast of burden. It connected temples, fortresses, and farms. From the coastal plains of the Pacific to the peaks where condors soared. Wherever one stood upon its stones, one was never lost. For every mile belonged to the sun. Along these roads ran the Chasquis, messengers swift as the wind, the living nerves of the empire. They carried quipus of knotted cords across mountains and valleys, each color and knot recording messages of tribute, harvest, and decree. No written words, yet no detail forgotten. Their lungs were forged by altitude, their minds trained by rhythm. They ran day and night, barefoot over frost and fire, passing messages from one to another at relay stations called tambos. At every tambo, food and water waited, and the next runner stood ready. A single message could cross 500 miles in just a few days, faster than many nations of the future could ever dream. To the Inca, communication was sacred. Words were not shouted, they were carried with reverence, for they came from the Sapa Inca, the voice of the sun himself. When a Chasqui arrived, people gathered in silence. He would kneel, present the quipu, and the reader, trained in the language of knots, would interpret its meaning. A few twists of colored thread, and the fate of a valley could change. But the roads were not only for messages. They were the arteries of life. Through them moved armies, traders, and pilgrims. Gold and salt, feathers and shells, corn and potatoes. In the markets of Cusco, you could see the world. Bright parrots from the jungle, seaweed from the coast, frozen fish carried on ice from the mountain lakes. Everything moved, yet nothing was wasted. Each journey was planned like a prayer. Each destination part of the same divine order. The Inca also built tampu wasi, way stations every 20 miles, shelters for travelers and storehouses for food. They stocked maize, dried meat, and water jars sealed with wax. Even at the edges of the empire, no one went hungry. The sun, they said, provided for all who walked in balance. And to walk these roads was to move in rhythm with the cosmos. Above the travelers, the Andes glowed. Snow peaks caught the fire of sunset. Condors glided through the thin blue air. At night, the stars mirrored the pattern of the roads below, as though the heavens themselves had been mapped upon the earth. Priests said that Inti's path across the sky was the same as the road's curve across the land, both eternal, both radiant, both made by the same divine hand. But the roads carried more than trade and tribute. They carried stories. A farmer from the coast could speak of golden temples in Cusco. A shepherd from the mountains could tell of the roaring sea. A child in a distant village could dream of places he would never see, because the stories ran faster than any runner, weaving the empire together in imagination as much as stone. At dawn, One could stand on a ridge and hear the echo of drums, signals passing through the valleys, announcing festivals or war. Sometimes, fire beacons lit the night, turning the empire into a chain of burning stars. The Inca world was alive, awake, aware. It pulsed with rhythm, the pulse of duty, devotion, and trust. Yet, beneath that perfection, something restless stirred. The runners began to whisper of strange ships on distant shores, of men with faces pale as the moon, and weapons that spat thunder. The roads that once carried prayers would soon carry warnings. For now, though, the messengers still run beneath the golden sky. Their feet strike the stones like the beating of a great heart. Their breath merges with the wind. And from horizon to horizon, the empire of the sun hums with life, a song of motion, unity, and grace, before the silence to come. From the heart of Cusco, the empire of the sun stretched outward like the rays of dawn, across valleys and rivers, over deserts and jungles, the banners of gold and crimson unfurled. The Inca called it Tawantinsuyu, the four regions united. And under its sunlit order, the Andes themselves seemed to bow. It was an empire that reached from the dry cliffs of Ecuador to the burning Atacama, 1,000 cities breathing as one. Their rhythm measured not in blood or plunder, but in precision, faith, and silence. At its height, the empire embraced more than 10 million souls. They spoke 100 tongues, wore 100 colors, and yet they called upon the same sun at dawn. The secret of this unity lay not in fear, but in structure, a design as intricate as the terraces carved into the mountains. Every family belonged to an alu, a community bound by shared land and labor. Every alu owed service to the state, the mita, a duty of building, farming, weaving, or guarding the roads. But in return, the state provided food, shelter, and festivals. No one starved, no one ruled alone. Each person was a thread in the golden fabric of the sun. The Inca did not rely on coin or trade for profit. They relied on balance. Grain from the lowlands fed the shepherds of the highlands. Llama wool from the mountains clothed the farmers by the sea. The empire's warehouses, kulkas, lined the roads like quiet guardians, filled with maize, quinoa, and dried meat. When the rains failed or frost struck, these stores opened, feeding whole valleys. To the Inca, prosperity was not wealth, but the absence of hunger. Above this living order stood the Sapa Inca, the emperor, radiant in divine solitude. He wore robes woven by the chosen women of the sun. Each thread dyed with gold dust and the blood of cochineal beetles. His throne was not carved from ivory or bronze, but from light itself. For when he stepped into the courtyard of Coricancha, the temple walls reflected him 100-fold. The people bowed, whispering his name as if it were prayer. To see him was to see the sun. But beneath the calm beauty of this world, the Inca were builders of iron will. They marched across landscapes that others feared, constructing fortresses upon impossible cliffs. Saksai Waman, Ollantaytambo, Choquequirao, cities that seemed to float between earth and sky. Their roads ran through the deathly passes of the Cordillera Blanca, where air froze and clouds turned to glass. Still, the Shaski ran, the farmers planted, the priests sang. It was a civilization that refused the word impossible. Pachacuti's descendants continued his vision. His son, Tupac Yupanqui, whose name meant resplendent warrior, led armies to the coast and conquered the Chimu, absorbing their knowledge of metal and art. From them, the Inca learned to shape gold into delicate leaves, silver into mirrors, and copper into tools. They did not melt the conquered, they transformed them. Each victory was followed by reconstruction. New roads, new terraces, new temples to Inti. Even in war, they sought harmony. A cosmic order where each conquest became another verse in the Song of the Sun. At night, the empire glowed. Fires lit the terraces, and drums echoed from mountain to mountain like the heartbeat of a giant. In the temples, priests observed the stars through sighting stones, measuring the breath of time itself. They said the sun's journey mirrored that of man, rising, burning, and setting, only to rise again. Life, death, and rebirth were all one circle. And the Inca stood at its center. For a century, their order seemed eternal. They built without metal, yet their walls outlasted empires of iron. They ruled without writing, yet their memory spanned generations. They spoke softly, yet their power reached from sea to jungle to snow. Travelers said that to walk the Inca roads was to walk within a prayer. But beyond the western horizon, beyond the calm line of the Pacific, a new wind was rising, a wind heavy with salt and smoke and iron. Whispers reached the temples of Cusco, carried by traders and messengers, of floating mountains upon the sea, of men whose skin was pale and voices strange, who rode beasts the size of llamas with eyes of fire. The priests laughed, for how could strangers cross the endless ocean? And yet, deep in the night, the llamas grew restless, and the sacred fires flickered without wind. For the first time in generations, the empire of the sun hesitated. It had conquered the land, the mountain, and the sky. But something unseen was coming, something that would not kneel before light. It began with rumors, whispers carried along the golden roads faster than wind. On the western horizon, they said, strange ships had appeared, floating mountains with white wings that drank the wind and bled thunder. From them stepped men whose skin was pale as bone, whose armor shone like captured sunlight. They came with animals the Inca had never seen, creatures tall as llamas, but with eyes that burned and feet that thundered. At first, the messengers laughed. No one could cross the endless ocean of the sun, yet the whispers grew, and soon they reached Cusco. When the strangers finally came ashore, they found a world unlike any they had imagined. The air was thin and cold, the mountains rose like gods. The villages shone with stone walls that fit tighter than their own castles. The people wore robes of alpaca wool, and gold gleamed on every temple door. To the invaders, it was a dream of heaven. To the Inca, it was the arrival of something they could not name. The year was 1532. Francisco Pizarro, with barely 180 men, stepped onto the coast of Peru, a handful of foreigners facing an empire of millions. But they carried something far heavier than numbers. Gunpowder, steel, and a hunger that no god could satisfy. They came not to learn, but to take. At that time, the Empire of the Sun was wounded. The great Sapa Inca, Huayna Capac, had died suddenly. Some said from a strange fever brought by the strangers before them. Two sons, Atahualpa and Huascar, fought bitterly for the throne. The roads that once carried prayers now carried soldiers. Villages burned, brothers turned against each other. And the unity that had once bound the Andes began to fray. The empire was still vast, still proud, but its heart had begun to crack. Pizarro saw the fracture and smiled. He sent gifts, words of friendship, promises of peace. He wrote letters the Inca could not read, and raised crosses the Inca did not understand. When Atahualpa finally agreed to meet him, in the town of Cajamarca, he came with 5,000 of his finest men, unarmed, draped in silks and feathers, believing no threat could rise from such a small band of wanderers. The strangers hid their cannons in the shadows of the square. The bells rang, trumpets blared, and then fire. The explosion shattered the air. Smoke roared between the walls as horses charged through the crowd. Men screamed, blinded by thunder and flame. Atahualpa was seized in the chaos. His guards cut down, his people scattered. When the smoke cleared, the child of the sun stood captive in chains. In the nights that followed, the conquerors demanded gold. The Inca filled entire rooms with it. Statues, vessels, tapestries, plates, all melted down into bars. They offered it as ransom for their emperor's life. But greed has no measure. When the chambers were full, the strangers took the gold and killed him anyway. They said Atahualpa's eyes remained calm as they led him to the square. He looked up at the cold moon and asked if the sun would rise again. Then the rope tightened, and the voice of the empire fell silent. From that night, the world of the Andes began to tremble. Temples were stripped, idols burned. The golden plates of Coricancha were torn from the walls. Their brilliance melted into foreign coins. The roads filled with smoke and mourning. The chasqui still ran, but now they carried only warnings. News of villages gone dark, of thunder that fell from strange weapons, of gods that did not answer. And yet, even as the sun seemed to vanish, the people of the Andes refused to forget. They hid their idols in caves. They whispered the old prayers at dawn. They planted maize beneath the stars and taught their children to face the east when they prayed. They said that Inti had not died. He had only turned his face away, waiting for the day when his children would remember the light. For centuries, the strangers would rule the land. They would take its gold, its crops, its names. But the mountains would never yield. Their peaks would still burn with the same fire at sunrise. Their rivers would still sing the same eternal song. And beneath those peaks, the Inca spirit, quiet, enduring, would whisper in the wind that never stops. The sun no longer rose the same way. Its light, once golden and pure, now struck the stones of Cusco like a memory half forgotten, where once the drums of the temple echoed with hymns. Now the air trembled with the cries of the conquered, the empire that had touched the sky, that had made roads over clouds and built terraces into eternity, was falling, not with thunder, but with silence. After Atahualpa's death, the land broke like glass. The strangers marched through valleys they did not understand, burning temples whose names they could not pronounce. Gold melted, languages vanished, and the voice of the sun was drowned beneath the weight of foreign prayers. The people of the Andes watched the smoke rise from their cities and wondered if the gods had turned away, or if this, too, was a test of faith. Yet, even in defeat, the Inca did not vanish. In the mountains above Cusco, survivors gathered: priests, farmers, soldiers, those who still believed that the sun could not be killed. They carried their idols wrapped in cloth, their quippers tied with the memory of their ancestors. They moved through the passes at night, the stars their only witnesses. They said they were not fleeing, only waiting for the light to return. The last of the royal blood, Manco Inca, rose from this exile. He was young, fierce, and still carried the divine thread of Inti in his blood. At first, he welcomed the strangers, hoping to rule beside them. But betrayal is a shadow that grows quickly. He saw the temples desecrated, the women taken, the gold stolen. He saw his people whipped for kneeling to the wrong god. And one night, in the chill of the mountains, he gathered what remained of his warriors and swore an oath before the eternal stars. "We will not die," he said. "We will become the mountain." They struck back, not with armies, but with the earth itself. They blocked the roads, ambushed the invaders from cliffs and canyons, faded into fog when the muskets fired. For a time, the strangers trembled. Cusco became a city under siege. The empire of the sun, though broken, still burned in its ashes. But time, like stone, wears even the strongest hearts. The guns never ran out of fire. The diseases brought by the strangers spread faster than any army. Villages emptied, terraces crumbled. The once perfect rhythm of the Andes fell out of tune. The chasqui stopped running. The drums stopped echoing. And the great roads that had carried prayers for centuries grew cold and silent under the frost. Still, some resisted. In the hidden valley of Vilcabamba, Manco Inca built a final refuge. There, his descendants ruled in secret for nearly 40 years, calling themselves the children of the last sun. They kept the old rituals alive, offering maize and smoke to the rising dawn, whispering to the mountains, "We are still here." And though the world around them darkened, the fire in their temples never fully died. In 1572, the strangers found Vilcabamba. They came with soldiers, crosses, and cannons. The last Inca king, Tupac Amaru III, was captured and brought to Cusco in chains. On the day of his execution, thousands of his people knelt in the square. He raised his head toward the sun and spoke softly. "Mother Earth, Father Sun, you see all." Then the blade fell, and the age of the Inca ended. But the sun did not die that day. It simply hid behind the mountains, waiting for the right moment to rise again. Centuries would pass, and still the stones would remember. In Machu Picchu, lost above the clouds, the terraces would bloom again, and the walls would hold their silence. Travelers would one day climb the trails of the Capac Ñan, their feet striking the same rhythm, As the runners who once carried the words of kings, the mountains would whisper their names. And in the wind, one could almost hear it, the echo of drums, the faint hum of prayers, the pulse of a civilization that refused to fade. For the Inca, death was never an end. It was only a turning, from stone to spirit, from sunlight to shadow. And as long as the sun still rose over the Andes, as long as maize grew beneath the sky, their empire lived, in memory, in mountain, in light. The empire was gone, but the mountains remained. They rose like eternal witnesses, holding their silence with the patience of gods. Where once the sun burned above processions of gold, now clouds drifted through the valleys in ghostly threads. And the wind carried only whispers, not of empire, but of memory. High above the sacred valley, hidden among the mist, lay a city untouched by flame or sword. Its walls were carved into the very bones of the Andes. Its terraces stepped toward the sky like frozen prayers. No conqueror had found it. No priest had desecrated its altars. To the world below, it was forgotten. But to the mountain, it still breathed. They called it Machu Picchu, the old peak. It had been built not for power, but for silence. A retreat for priests, astronomers, and chosen women of the sun. Here, the Inca observed the sky through stone windows that framed the solstice, marking the precise moment when the sun kissed the mountain's shoulder. Every dawn, the first ray of light entered the temple like a golden thread, binding heaven and earth once more. Even after the fall, that light still returned, steady, unwavering, a reminder that time could destroy cities, but not the path of the sun. Moss covered the walls now. Vines crept along stairways once trodden by barefoot pilgrims. The pools that once held sacred water mirrored only clouds. And yet, every line, every curve of stone remained perfect. The builders had shaped them to breathe with the mountain, to shift with the earth, to endure the tremors of eternity. In the quiet rain, they seemed alive, as if the stones themselves remembered the prayers of those who built them. Sometimes, at dusk, when the fog lifted, the terraces glowed gold beneath the fading light. The wind moved through the empty halls and carried faint echoes, the rustle of robes, the murmur of Quechua hymns, the rhythm of a flute long silent. It was as if the Inca spirit had chosen this place, to sleep and dream, away from the noise of conquest and the dust of empires. In the villages below, life continued. Farmers still planted maize in terraces their ancestors carved. Women still wove cloth with symbols of the sun. Children still greeted the dawn facing east, their small voices whispering to Inti as their forefathers had done. Though the empire was gone, its language still curled through the valleys. Its rituals still pulsed beneath the soil, for the Andes had not forgotten. They held memory the way stone holds fire, deep, unseen, indestructible. Centuries passed. Foreign kingdoms rose and fell. Ships crossed oceans. Wars were fought. And the world forgot the people who had once ruled the clouds. But the mountains did not forget. Their peaks still cut the same sky. Their rivers still sang the same song. and hidden above them, the silent city slept, a dream of stone waiting for its dawn. Then, one day in the early years of a new century, a traveler named Hiram Bingham followed a trail of legends and found the city again. He climbed through vines and mist, and when he emerged into the sunlight, he saw the terraces unfolding before him, step after step, breath after breath, a vision suspended between earth and heaven. The world gasped at its beauty, calling it a lost city, but it had never been lost. It had simply waited. Bingham's discovery did not awaken the dead. It only reminded the living that the past is never truly gone. Machu Picchu became a bridge across time, a whisper from the age when men built with faith instead of fear. Every traveler who stands upon its terraces feels that silence, not empty, but full of breath, of prayer, of something eternal, woven into the wind itself. At night, when the stars return to the same constellations the Inca once traced, the city glows faintly under their gaze. The stones catch the moonlight, and for a moment, it is as if the sun still lingers there, hiding behind the moon, watching over his children as they sleep. Empires rise and fall. Gold melts, words fade, but stone endures, and within that endurance, the spirit of a civilization breathes on. In the hush between dusk and dawn, the Andes exhale, and you can almost hear it. A slow, ancient heartbeat. The pulse of the Inca world still alive. In the quiet temples of the mountain, the night air over the Andes feels alive, thin, cold, and yet humming softly with memory. Every gust of wind seems to carry a voice, an echo of footsteps on ancient stone, the whisper of hands that once carved mountains into meaning. The empire is gone, but its spirit drifts across the peaks, woven into the air itself. It is no longer an empire of kings. It is an empire of echoes. In the highlands of Peru, the rhythm of the Inca still beats quietly. Farmers rise before dawn, watching the first lights spill over the terraces their ancestors built. They still plant by the lunar calendar, still turn their faces east to greet the sun. When they harvest maize or quinoa, they pour the first handful onto the earth and whisper, "For Pachamama, the mother of all." The language is older than empire, the gesture older than memory. In it lives a belief that never died, that the world is alive, and that man's duty is to live in harmony, not dominion. The people of the Andes call themselves Runa, simply the people. They speak Quechua, the same soft, melodic language that once echoed in the halls of Cusco. It is a tongue of mountains and wind, where every word seems to rise and fall like a hill. Through it, they still tell the old stories of Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, of the sun's tears that formed the rivers, of the golden bridges between worlds. They tell these stories not to worship the past, but to keep the present gentle. For in every tale of the gods, there is also a lesson for the living. Music, too, remembers. At night, when the fires burn low, you can still hear the flute called quena, its voice thin and haunting, like a breeze moving through hollow bone. The drums echo the rhythm of the heart, and when the panpipes answer, the valleys seem to sigh. It is not sorrow, but reverence. a melody that rises with the smoke, reaching toward the stars where the ancestors dwell. In every market, color blooms like sunrise. Women weave cloths dyed with crimson and indigo, their fingers repeating patterns passed down for centuries. Spirals, suns, condors, rivers. Each thread is a prayer, each shape a memory. When the cloth is finished, it is not only worn, it is lived. The same patterns that once adorned the robes of the Sapa Inca now rest on the shoulders of shepherds and children, bright against the shadowed hills. And so, the empire continues, not in stone or crown, but in hands, hearts, and rhythm. The Andes remain both cradle and guardian. Its people walk the same trails the Chasqui once ran, their sandals striking the old stones with the same steady cadence. They still follow the Capac Ñan, the royal road that once bound a continent, though now it is lined not with soldiers, but with pilgrims and dreamers, moving not for duty, but for remembrance. Sometimes, when the fog rolls through the valleys, and the stars glint above like cold fire, one might think the mountains are breathing again. Some swear they have seen lights moving along the ridges, soft and golden, like torches carried by invisible hands. They say those are the Inca spirits, guardians of the roads, keeping watch over those who walk with respect. Others say it is only the wind, but in the Andes, the wind itself is sacred. Every sound belongs to someone. Far below, in the cities of today, Cusco still shines. Tourists wander its streets, touching the same stones that once formed the Palace of the Sun. They marvel at how perfectly they fit, how time, earthquakes, and empires could not break them. But what they do not see is that the perfection was never about strength. It was about harmony. The Inca did not fight the mountain. They listened to it. They built not on top of the world, but within it. That is why their echoes remain. And when the night deepens, and the sky folds into its quiet silver, you can still hear that echo if you listen. It hums beneath the stars. It breathes in the rivers. It waits in the silence between two heartbeats. It says, "We are still here. We are the children of the sun, and the mountains remember our names." For in the end, the greatest empire is not one that conquers the earth, but one that becomes it. Night has settled over the Andes once more. The stars gleam like cold embers scattered across the black sky, and the wind moves slow, ancient, patient. Far below, rivers murmur like breathing in the dark. You can almost hear it, the quiet rhythm of eternity, somewhere between stone and sky. The Inca still dream. The terraces of Machu Picchu rest under a blanket of silver light. Mist drifts across the ruins like a veil, curling around the broken walls and silent stairways. Each stone glows faintly, as though the moon remembers its purpose. There is no sound of conquest here, no echo of war, only the soft pulse of the earth. If you close your eyes, you can almost see them. Priests in white robes watching the horizon, farmers kneeling in prayer before their maize, children laughing beside the sacred springs. They are gone, and yet they are not. They are the dust in the air, the shimmer on the water, the warmth that lingers long after the fire is gone. The sun has set behind the mountains, but to the people of the Andes, The sun never truly disappears. It only sleeps, traveling beneath the world to light another side of heaven. And when it returns, it will bring with it the memory of all it has seen. Every dawn is not a beginning, but a homecoming. You breathe in the high mountain air. It smells of wet stone and smoke, of time and distance. Somewhere a flute hums faintly, its melody rising like a sigh between the stars. Each note falls like a drop of water into silence. And in that silence, you feel the weight of centuries, not heavy, but comforting. The Andes are not graveyards, they are guardians. Below the mountains, villages glow faintly with firelight. Families sit together, their faces warmed by the same flames that once burned in the temples of the sun. They tell stories to their children, not of gold or conquest, but of balance, of duty, of light. They teach them that power is not found in dominion, but in devotion, that every grain of soil has a soul, and every dawn is a gift. And as the children fall asleep beside those fires, the empire of the Inca breathes again, not in palaces, but in hearts. The wind drifts higher. It moves across the mountains like a prayer whispered in two worlds. Through it, the echoes return. Footsteps on the Capac Ñan, the breath of the Chasqui, the rustle of robes in the Coricancha. The sound grows softer and softer until it becomes something else, the sound of your own heartbeat. You are no longer listening to history, you are part of it. The stars shift. A faint glow begins to gather behind the peaks. The horizon turns blue, then pale gold. The first bird calls, and from the edge of the world, the sun rises again, slow, majestic, eternal. It touches the stones of the old temples, and for a moment, the world seems to remember itself. The light crawls across the terraces, kissing every blade of grass, every forgotten altar, every scar left by time. And in that light, the Andes exhale, a long, slow breath that seems to reach through the centuries. You feel it pass through you, gentle as sleep. It tells you that nothing truly ends, that all things rise, fall, and rise again, like the sun, like breath, like dreams. Close your eyes now. Let the mountains fade into shadow. Let the rivers grow distant. Let the stars hum softly around you. The empire of the sun is gone, but its warmth remains. In the stone, in the air, in you. Somewhere above, the sky deepens into silver. The last light lingers on the peaks, and the Andes whisper one final time. The sun sleeps, but it will rise again. And as you drift into dream, you follow it into that golden horizon beyond the mountains, where light never dies, and the children of the sun rest forever, in peace. The Andes grow silent now, and only the wind remains, carrying your breath into the stars. If the story of the Inca has guided you gently into sleep, let it rest here with the mountains. And when you wake, may the first light remind you that every sunrise is the return of something once lost. If you wish to journey again, to follow the rise and fall of other forgotten worlds, you may return here, to the quiet place where history dreams. Whisper to the night. Play the next civilization. and another empire will rise behind your closed eyes. Good night. Child of the sun, may your dreams walk the ancient roads, until dawn finds you once more.